This episode contains discussions of graphic violence, murder, and themes relating to sex work, which some viewers may find distressing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back to London's Dark Archives. In this episode, we delve into one of the most chilling mysteries of 1960s London. A series of brutal killings that gripped the borough of Hammersmith with fear. These unsolved crimes resemble an infamous chapter of London's darker history, where another shadowy figure eluded capture. Once again, the name Jack was bestowed upon this faceless predator, forever linking these atrocities to the city's most sinister legends. London in early 1960s, a city of contrasts, where the optimism of a post-war boom collided with the shadows of its darker past. The streets, particularly in Soho and the West End, were alive with energy. Bustling pubs, neon-lit cabaret clubs, and a thriving, gritty undercurrent of nightlife. But beneath the surface, another kind of activity was stirring, one that would grip the city in fear and evoke chilling echoes of its Victorian past. The Hammersmith Nude Murders, as they became known, shocked Londoners to their core. A string of women, strangled, stripped, and discarded in grim locations, became the victims of a predator who would soon be given the name Jack the Stripper. A moniker was no accident. It immediately drew parallels to the terror of 1888, when another Jack stalked the streets across the city in East London, brutally killing women and leaving a trail of mystery and dread. This time, the hunting ground weren't Whitechapel, but the west of the city, where glitz collided with grit. Hammersmith, with its quiet streets and pubs along the Thames, became the art of this investigation. Soho and the West End, with their flashing lights and murky underworld, added another layer to the case. Was this killer part of the same criminal circles operating in these areas, or was he using the chaos of London's nightlife as a cover for his sinister activities? As the murders unfolded, the city buzzed with speculation and fear. And in the years since, one theory has lingered. A theory so sensational it continues to divide opinion. So let's take a step back into 60s London and go step by step through the murders and into the theories, including the shocking possibility that one of the country's most beloved sports stars may have harboured a dark secret. This narrative delves into the heartbreaking stories of lives abruptly taken and a city paralysed by fear. The women at the centre of this tale were not just faceless victims, they were beloved daughters, cherished sisters and loyal friends, each with their own experiences and dreams. Their lives cut short the fateful moment when their paths intersected with a merciless killer. As we explore their individual stories, we see not only their struggles and aspirations, but also the ripple effects their losses had on families and the community, painting a poignant picture of grief and resilience in the face of tragedy. The series of murders began, though not immediately recognised, with the discovery of Elizabeth Figg in June 1959. The 21-year-old waitress, Elizabeth was described by friends as a quiet and polite woman, someone who often kept to herself. On that fateful morning, her body was found partially clothed in Duke's Meadow, Chiswick, close to the Thames. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. She was last seen the evening before her death walking in the area. At the time, the police treated the death as an isolated tragedy. There was no indication that her murder would later be connected to a string of similar crimes. 4 years later, in November 1963, the body of 22-year-old Gwyneth Rees was found in an alleyway in Kensington. Gwyneth, originally from Wales, had moved to London in search of work and adventure. She lived a life of struggle, taking on jobs where she could, but had recently become involved in sex work to make ends meet. Like Elizabeth, her cause of death was strangulation. At the time, her death was seen as unrelated to Elizabeth's, and the connection between the murders weren't yet apparent. Gwyneth was remembered by those who knew her as friendly and kind, but often caught between the challenges of urban life and her dreams of independence. By early 1964, the killer's modus operandi began to take shape. On February 2nd, 30-year-old Anna Tailforth's body was discovered near Hammersmith Bridge, floating in the Thames. Anna, originally from Sunderland, had come to London with hopes of building a better life. She was known to frequent the West End and worked as a sex worker to support herself. Her death bore chilling similarities to the other cases: strangulation and a grim detail that became the killer's signature. Several of her teeth had been forcibly removed. Friends described her as cheerful and resilient despite her difficult circumstances. On April 8, 1964, the killer struck again. Irene Lockwood, a 25-year-old woman, was found dead on the same stretch of riverbank where Anna had been fouled. Irene, who had struggled with poverty and addiction, was known to the community in Hammersmith. Like Anna, she worked in the red light district and had a reputation for being generous to others in similar circumstances. Her death by strangulation made it clear to the police the murders were connected. The media began drawing parallels to another unsolved spree of killing decades earlier, coining the moniker Jack the Stripper in a macabre nod to Jack the Ripper. On April 24, 1964, the body of 22-year-old Ellen Bartholomew was discovered in Brentford. Ellen was a talented artist in her youth but had fallen into hard times and turned to sex work. She had been seen shortly before her death in Soho, a hotspot for the West End nightlife scene. Unlike the previous victims, her body was remarkably clean, suggesting the killer had access to industrial facilities where evidence could be meticulously removed. This discovery gave police a significant clue, but it weren't enough to stop the murderer. On July 14, 1964, Mary Fleming, 30, was found in Chiswick. Originally from Scotland, she was described as lively and talkative, someone who made friends easily despite the hardships she faced. She spent years in London working as a sex worker to survive. Her death followed the now familiar pattern: strangulation, removal of teeth, and evidence of post-mortem tampering. Mary was last seen by acquaintances in the Soho area, and her death deepened the public's fear of the killer on the loose. In October 1964, the murder of 21-year-old Frances Brown, also known as Margaret McGowan, added a new layer of tragedy to the investigation. Frances had appeared as a witness in a court case involving a high-profile client just months earlier. She was well known in the West End and reportedly been trying to leave sex work behind to start a new chapter in her life. Her body was discovered in Kensington, and her murder reaffirmed the killer's methodical nature. By this time, women in London's red light district lived in constant fear. The final known victim was Bridget O'Hara, a 28-year-old Irish woman who had moved to London in search of opportunity. Known as Bridie to her friends, she was well liked but often struggled with poverty and addiction. On the 16th of February 1965, her body was found in an industrial storage yard in Acton. Like Ellen, her body showed signs of being cleaned, further supporting the theory the killer had access to industrial facilities. Bridget's death marked the end of the confirmed murders, but the case would forever remain unsolved. Each of these women lived full yet complicated lives before their tragic ends, and their stories serve as a sobering reminder of the struggles faced by many in London during this era. The absence of justice for these victims leaves their cases shrouded in mystery and sorrow. The discovery of multiple victims across West London sent its shockwaves through the Metropolitan Police. The investigation into the Hammersmith Nude Murders was one of the most complex and high-profile cases of the 1960s. With each new victim, the pressure mounted and the spotlight on the police grew ever brighter. At first, the police struggled to link the murders. Spanning years and covering a wide area of London, from Hammersmith and Brentford to Kensington, there was no clear thread connecting the victims beyond the horrific nature of the crimes. Without the advanced technology we rely on today, detectives worked with what they had: eyewitness accounts, physical evidence, and old-fashioned legwork. But they faced an uphill battle. Forensics in the 1960s was still in its infancy. DNA profiling was decades away, and many crime scenes were contaminated or disturbed before proper procedures could be followed. Even fingerprinting, though in use, relied heavily on finding surfaces clean enough to produce viable prints, something the killer carefully avoided. The public's fear was palpable, particularly among women living or working in Soho, the West End and around Hammersmith. Rumours swirled through the newspapers and television reports, heightening the sense of panic. There was relentless media scrutiny. Every failure, every setback in the investigation was splashed across headlines. The police weren't just racing against time to stop a killer, they were fighting to maintain the public's trust. The killer's choice of victims also posed a challenge. Most of the women were connected to London's nightlife, often working in precarious situations that left them vulnerable. Witnesses were scarce, and those who might have had information were reluctant to come forward, fearing police reprisals or worse, retribution from the underworld. The killer's apparent familiarity with industrial sites where the bodies were found also stumped investigators. The theory emerged that he might have been a worker or someone with access to these areas, but this lead alone weren't enough to narrow the suspect pool. As the murders continued, several suspects was questioned. One of the most notable early theories involved a connection to the world of entertainment and boxing, though evidence was circumstantial at best. Other suspects included a disgraced police officer, a known criminal with ties to the West End, and even a wealthy businessman whose car was spotted near one of the crime scenes. Despite these leads, the lack of hard evidence kept the investigation from progressing. The police's frustration grew, and so did the killer's infamy. The Hammersmith Nude Murders exposed not just the brutality of the killer, but the limitations of the 1960s police force. Each victim deserved justice, yet as the case dragged on, hope for answers began to fade. Still, the investigation didn't stop. Detectives worked tirelessly, determined to bring closure to these women's families and to end the fear gripping London streets. Now we come to one of the most intriguing and controversial theories surrounding the Hammersmith Nude Murders: the possible involvement of Freddie Mills, one of Britain's most beloved sportsmen of the 20th century. Freddie Mills was an household name. Born in Bournemouth in 1919, he rose to fame as a professional boxer and became the world light heavyweight champion in 1948. He was known as a gritty, courageous fighter who never backed down, a trait that earned him adoration of the British public. But boxing in Mills' era was brutal, safety measures was minimal, and the toll it took on fighters' bodies and minds was immense. Mills himself was no exception. By the time he retired in 1950, he'd endured countless blows to the head, which some speculate contributed to the excruciating headaches and depression he battled later in life. After hanging up his gloves, Mills reinvented himself as a showman and as a businessman. He appeared in films, hosted television shows, and opened a nightclub in Soho, an hub of London's nightlife, and unfortunately, its seedy underworld. Though a darling in the media, Mills was reportedly struggling behind the scenes. Friends and family have spoken about his bouts of depression and his difficulty adjusting to life outside the ring. For all his public charm, it's clear Mills was carrying private burdens which some believe led him down a dark and tragic path. So how did a loved sports icon become linked to a string of horrific murders? The theory first emerged years after the murders, when speculation arose about Mills' connection to the West End's red light district. His nightclub was situated in the Art Soho, placing him in direct proximity to many of the victims' lives. Some witnesses alleged he had a fascination, possibly an unhealthy one, with the women who worked those streets. Then there's the matter of his mental health. Mills' severe headaches and episodes of depression led some to speculate he could have suffered from undiagnosed conditions such as traumatic brain injury or even dissociative episodes. In this theory, those factors could have driven him to commit acts of violence without clear memory or motive. Circumstantial evidence also adds to the mystery. Mills owned a car similar to one seen near a crime scene, and some rumours suggest he may have been questioned by the police, though no official records could confirm this. This theory is far from universally accepted, so what's the counter-argument? Well, there's no direct evidence linking Mills to the murders, no fingerprints, no witness accounts placing at the scenes, and no confession. The idea that he was the killer rests almost entirely on circumstantial connections and posthumous speculation. Moreover, Mills' public persona and lifestyle didn't fit the typical profile of a serial killer. He was a family man with a busy career and little indication, at least outwardly, of the kind of behaviour that might lead to such crimes. Some believe the theory gained traction because of Mills' tragic end. In 1965, just a year after the last of the Hammersmith murders, Freddie Mills was found dead in his car, a rifle wound to his head. Officially ruled a suicide, his death has since been surrounded by rumours of foul play, debt to criminals, and even a cover-up. To this day, the idea of Freddie Mills as Jack the Stripper divides opinion. For some, it's a fascinating possibility that connects a beloved celebrity to one of London's darkest mysteries. For others, it's unfair to tarnish a man who suffered greatly in private and whose life ended so tragically. Whether Mills was involved or not, his story adds another layer of complexity to the case, blurring the line between fame, mental health struggles, and the shadowy underbelly of 1960s London. The Hammersmith Nude Murders remain one of London's most perplexing cold cases. While Freddie Mills' name is often mentioned in connection to the crimes, he's far from the only suspect. Over the years, other figures have been proposed potential Jack the Stripper, each with their own disturbing connections to the case. One of the most chilling theories points to Harold Jones. Jones was a convicted murderer from Wales who in the 1920s killed 2 young girls but was released after serving time as a juvenile offender. By the 1960s, Jones was living in London and working in jobs that brought him into contact with the city sex workers. Some investigators believe his criminal past and proximity to the red light district make him a compelling suspect. Another name that often surfaces is Mungo Island, a man employed as a crime scene cleaner. Island was linked to the case when a note believed to be a suicide letter was discovered after his death in 1965. In the note, he reportedly wrote, "I can't go on any longer. To save you and the police looking for me, I'll be in the garage." Although this has been interpreted as a potential confession, no hard evidence ever connected Island to the murders. Then there's the theories that focus on the possibility of a police officer or someone with law enforcement ties being involved, and that stems from the killer's ability to evade detection despite the significant resources allocated to the investigation. For all the theories and speculation, the case remains unsolved for several reasons. First, the era's forensic techniques were limited. DNA analysis, trace evidence collection, and criminal profiling, the tools that modern investigations rely upon, simply didn't exist in the 1960s. The police were working with far fewer resources, and crucial evidence may have been overlooked or mishandled. Second, the transient nature of the victims' lives made it difficult to track their movements or identify potential witnesses. Many of the women lived on the fringes of society, which tragically meant their disappearances were not always noticed immediately. Finally, the climate of fear and media frenzy around the case added immense pressure on the police. Speculation and sensational headlines may have clouded the investigation, leading to false leads and public panic rather than progress. The Hammersmith Nude Murders cast a long shadow over London in the 1960s, altering public perceptions of crime and safety. Before these crimes, the city was still emerging from the post-war period, a time of optimism and rebuilding. But the discovery of the first body, and each one after, shattered any lingering sense of innocence. The gruesome nature of the murders and the killer's apparent ability to evade capture left Londoners feeling vulnerable. For women, especially those working in nightlife or on the streets, the murders were a chilling reminder of the dangers they faced. Public campaigns urging women to take precautions become more common, though these often placed the burden of safety on potential victims rather than addressing systemic issues. The case also influenced crime reporting, with the media sensationalising the murders to sell papers. The moniker Jack the Stripper was itself a deliberate echo of Jack the Ripper, ensuring the crimes would capture attention and stoking fears that another prolific serial killer was stalking the streets of London. The story of Jack the Stripper remains one of London's most daunting mysteries, a series of brutal murders that left a trail of grief and fear in their wake. Each victim was more than just a name in the headlines. They was women with lives, stories and struggles, all tragically cut short by an unknown hand. The enduring mystery of the Hammersmith Nude Murders continues to captivate and chill us, not just because of the gruesome nature of the crimes, but because the killer was never brought to justice. Who was Jack the Stripper? Was it someone famous like Freddie Mills, or an unassuming figure who vanished into the shadows? For decades, the case has raised more questions than answers, and perhaps that's why it still resonates today. It reminds us of the fragility of life, the dark corners of society, and the limits of even the most determined investigations. So what do you think? Could Freddie Mills really been connected to these horrific crimes, or does the evidence, or lack of it, point us in a different direction? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this enduring mystery and the theories surrounding it. Share your opinions in the comments below, whether you believe Freddie Mills was a suspect or if another name comes to mind. Thank you for joining me in this journey into one of London's darkest chapters. Please like and subscribe if you can, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.